The Longing is a game that takes 400 days, 9,600 hours to complete. Why? Why the hell would you make a game that long? Gamers are obsessed with how long it takes to complete a video game, and as a result, gaming companies are constantly competing to have the longest game possible. Now with multiplayer games, this is easy. They technically never end. At least they shouldn't. I looked it up, and apparently Overwatch 2 has a time to complete of around 150 hours, even though it's a match-based team game where it takes 25 minutes to play a round and there's as many rounds as you ever want there to be. Saying you completed Overwatch 2 is like saying, yeah, I 100% of baseball. No, you didn't. Fuck you. What does that even mean? It's fucking baseball. Just go play more. Let's talk about single player games though. Persona 5 Royale took me 120 hours to beat. Great game. But for every hour you spend exploring dungeons and inflicting ego death, you then gotta go spend an hour with your dumbass friends who won't stop declaring in public that they're part of a terrorist organization. They'll say their little voice lines going, "We're the Phantom Thieves." And then 12 seconds later they're saying, "We're the Phantom Thieves," a second time in a scene right after. But this time, Atlas couldn't even be bothered to pay the voice actor to read it to me. So I'm just reading what this dude is saying instead of listening to it. And he's just saying the same thing he did before. So now Joker from Smash Bros has heard this twice now, and even he's getting sick of this shit, so he goes home. Well, we have to read yet another goddamn block of text. Except this time the text isn't things that people are saying. It's actual in-universe text messages from the guys I was just talking to. And they're just saying, "We're the Phantom Thieves," you know, just in case you forgot. And at this point, not only does Joker have to read this conversation he's already heard twice before, but as the player, I have to read this conversation I've already read twice before, and have also had read to me by the voice actor that Atlas paid to read one of these 3 blocks of text. And after all of that's done, it's time to go right to sleep because this goddamn shit took all night to get through. And as Joker drifts to sleep, I have to read his text now, except his text is just his thoughts, and he's over here just thinking to himself, damn, I really am the Phantom Thieves. This is half the game. Persona 5 is a long game, in large part because it's constantly wasting the player's time, forcing them to read the same lines of dialogue, saying the exact same things over and over again for seemingly no other reason other than to pad out what would already be a 60 to 80 hour experience. And yet somehow, this game wastes nowhere near as much time as The Longing. The Longing is nothing like Persona. You are not a well-dressed Japanese teenager. You do not have any friends. You do not spend half the game running around dungeons. Instead, you spend the entire game walking around a single dungeon at the most mind-numbingly glacial pace imaginable, where Persona forces you to experience literally dozens of hours of repetitive, unnecessary dialogue. The Longing instead forces you to go through dozens of hours of absolutely nothing. Silence, contemplation, and the anticipation of what's to come. The Longing is the intellectual's waste of time, and despite this game having a story so simple it could be summarized in just 2 or 3 sentences, I'm going to be summarizing it in 200 to 300, because although simple, The Longing still somehow manages to have a more thought-provoking message than 50 hours of text boxes from a AAA JRPG could ever hope to. We play as the Shade, a small, neurotic, pathetic, soot-covered goblin standing in awe of this massive and regal figure, our father, the king, a being so grand and powerful that even in his slumber, his visage dominates the game's focus. Next to him, the Shade is reduced to nothing more than a small footnote moving along his periphery. Unlike so many other games where the pace of gameplay is either directly or indirectly set by the player, here in The Longing, the pace of the game is controlled entirely by the king, with his single command. In 400 days, you are to wake him to end the world's pain and longing, and until that time comes, wait. Naturally, I'm not going to be doing that. You have a lot of time until your moment of duty comes, and what you decide to do with your 400 days is not the decision of the king. That choice ultimately belongs to you, and you alone. If you want to sit in your little goon cave outside the king's throne and read public domain literature until it's time to wake daddy up from his coma, that's an entirely valid decision that no one will stop you from making. You will see the game's ending just as anyone else, and life will move on. But if you choose to do that, you would remain ignorant of what could have been. And to wait all that time and not even once see where that small staircase to the right of our father goes. Seems like a bit of a missed opportunity, doesn't it? So I chose to venture out and see what this ancient and abandoned kingdom had for us to experience. As you wander further away from the king, the grandiose music of his hall slowly fades into nothing but the ambient sounds of empty caves. The camera zooms in to focus on the Shade as the king, now out of sight, is no longer the subject, becoming nothing more than a thought in the back of your mind. But although no longer present, he is never forgotten, as the foreboding countdown started at his command continues, through not only the entire time you spend playing the game, but also the time you spend not playing the game, as this 400-day countdown continues even when the game is closed. A reminder that this game is, first and foremost, not our entertainment, but instead our service to the king. So what is there to actually do here during our 400 days? Gameplay includes being bored out of our mind while aimlessly wandering the realm of the king, philosophizing about the meaning of life, and ripping all of the light fixtures out of the walls, breaking all of our dad's stuff, and filling every possible inch of free space in our bedroom with all the shit we've managed to steal along the way. Then covering the gaps in between with crude drawings of spiders, clowns, and whatever this is supposed to be. Well, it's a well. But just how do we steal all this sweet stuff? You gotta find it. And to find it, you need to explore the caves. And to explore the caves, you need to solve puzzles. The puzzles in this game are unlike almost any other. See that pickaxe in the cave below us? We're gonna need that if we want to rip all the lamps out of the walls in the main hall. But just how do we get it? In other, shorter games, you would use a bomb to open a path or find some alternate route around to get to the lower cave. Not in the longing, however. You just walk over to this weak support beam and just kind of stand there motionlessly for 6 real-time minutes until the ground finally gives way the moment I try to alt-tab to look at something else, allowing us to fall directly through the tunnel and get our pickaxe. Every single puzzle in this game is time-based, with this one probably being the fastest one to complete. As you wander further into the caverns of this kingdom, we find beds of moss that will take weeks to grow, a drip of water over a pit which blocks our progress, a slowly cracking stalactite conveniently hanging over a spot where we need a little step up. These roadblocks can take weeks or even months to open themselves up to us, with new parts of the king's realm seemingly opening up every time you come back to play the game again, revealing new and interesting ways to waste even more of our time. One day I wandered to a point deep within the recesses of the kingdom's maze-like caves, where I found a place simply called Eternity. Whereas the rest of the kingdom had fallen into a dirty, rotten, decayed state, Eternity stood pristine, clean, with uncracked pillars that supported a grand vaulted ceiling, and a room that seemingly stretched on forever. In Eternity, time stands still. You know, just in case 400 days wasn't already enough time for you. Here the shade can wander indefinitely, occasionally collecting the litter from visitors who have come before. Here there are no puzzles to solve or obstacles to overcome, no blockades to our progress, and yet no progress to be made. There's just you, the void, and the sound of the shade's absolute fucking hogs slapping against the cold marble floors. For prolonged periods of time, I would click on the other side of the screen from the shade and go catatonic as he automatically walked forward. For some, this place may sound like heaven, effortlessly walking forward, occasionally picking up little treats from the grounds. As someone who requires a constant supply of dopamine in order to maintain my focus, however, this is where I started to lose my goddamn mind. But there's nothing a bit of creative problem solving can't overcome. While the shade is bound to the reality of his world, forever walking forward through the void with nothing but the thought of what may lay beyond to keep himself occupied with, I was free to occupy my own mind with a second idle game for when nothing was happening in my first one, and then a third idle game for when nothing was happening in my second, and then a fourth for when there was nothing to do in my third. This went on for 90 minutes, at which point I decided to look up what was at the end of Eternity and found out why it's called Eternity. There is no end, it is actually infinite. So I turned back, only to realize that there's no fast travel in this game, and you have to walk back the exact same distance you walked on your way in. Even when we're stuck outside time, this game is finding new ways to waste it. Which brings us back to our original question. Why? Why play a game seemingly built to waste as much of your time as it possibly can? Ultimately, it comes down to what I believe is the core thesis of The Longing, something that I could only come to understand after experiencing it firsthand. This game that makes me walk slowly for hours across empty caves, this game that makes me wait for weeks for mushrooms to grow and to puddles to fill holes in the ground, this game that makes me sit for days just waiting for something to happen is not a game that wastes your time. It's a game about what it means to waste time. Something special about such a quiet and lonely game is that even the most mundane occurrences become thought-provoking, if for nothing else other than the fact that they break up the silence. A piece of coal falling from the ceiling is not just an aesthetic of this crumbling kingdom, but also a chance for us to create another coal drawing which we can hang in our bedroom back home. A patch of moss growing can be collected and made into a bed for us to find comfort in. A toilet goes from a basic household necessity to a a symbol of triumph that took literal months of exploration and resource gathering to achieve. Despite the game seemingly being built around wasting time, there is surprisingly little here that doesn't hold at least some significance, even down to the errant thoughts of the Shade himself. One time, the Shade said to me that smells can take you places. So I built a stink bomb in his bedroom, forcing him to vacate. He then proceeded to walk on his own accord for 30 minutes through the darkness and up into a secret path that led to a special tower with this dead guy, a bunch of dead animals, some books, and a magic crystal emitting a gentle song. Naturally, I stole the crystal and added it to my collection of ill-gotten goods. Speaking of which, even the decorations we've been stealing all this time serve a purpose, not only as amusements for us the player or as comfort for our Shade, but as the Shade's home becomes more comfortable, he goes from a constant state of depression to a state of gleeful contentment, and as the Shade begins to feel more happy, time passes more quickly, allowing us to reach the ending faster. The happier we are, the less time we as the player are wasting. But finding happiness with what we have here in the caves is not the only path available to us. Venturing beyond the realm of the king and destroying a small spider's web, only to watch her slowly build another, not only serves as a momentous occasion that allows us to climb further to places we've never been before, but in the process allows me to find some glowing mushrooms growing in this cool dark tunnel above my home. Naturally, I immediately consumed them the moment the option unveiled itself to me, and I began to hallucinate. In my delirium, I saw an old man drawing water from a well on the surface, while his grandson played beside him. This was the Shade's first vision of what the world outside the king's realm may look like. And to think, if we hadn't wandered outside our bedroom and harassed the local wildlife before eating these magic mushrooms we found on the ground, we may have never known. And when I say magic mushrooms, I do in fact mean that literally. Remember that stalactite from earlier? Well, after a few real-life weeks, that will fall, allowing us to continue up these stairs and discover something special. Etched within the walls of this long-forgotten branch of the caves, there exists a wise and seemingly all-knowing being, the only other in this realm capable of speaking aside from ourselves and the king. It is hard to imagine him serving as anything other than a trusted advisor to the king with his vast knowledge, a sage to the people in the kingdom he served. But with no people left, he now rests here alone, forever stuck to the wall, with nothing to keep him company save for 2 radiant sapphires, providing a dim light so that he may observe the tomb he is trapped in for all eternity. Looking upon this face, I thought to myself, these are mine now, as I added the sapphires to my collection, but not before making an inquiry of the face's wisdom. There exists before us a choice. The first is that made by the king. We wake him as was asked of us, and he will end all longing as he promised. But we are warned that those without longing will no longer need the world, and to end all pain and longing means to end the world. That is to say, the king's gonna kill everyone. Like, everyone. This isn't just a countdown to when the king wakes up. This is a countdown to when everyone else is being put to sleep. However, that is only the first choice available to us. The second being to leave the cave. We are warned, however, that this decision is irreversible, and to do so will be to abandon both our duty and the king. The king is gonna kill everyone. I don't think the developers actually meant for this to be a hard choice. But if we do choose to leave the caves, we should be careful to avoid the child who is afraid of the dark, and instead seek an old man who in his blindness will not fear the Shade, the ugly little shit. The visions we saw from the mushrooms were not hallucinations of the Shade's dreams. They were an actual view of what was happening above the caves, and a hint as to how we get out of here. Which brings us to what I believe is the central thesis of this game. You can spend 9,600 hours of your life doing whatever you want. That choice ultimately belongs to you and you alone. You can spend those 400 days mindlessly sitting around, wasting your time at the direction of some authority figure who sees you only as a tool, doing the same menial tasks over and over again, experiencing the same experiences day in, day out, never striving for anything more, merely finding contentment in the collection of trinkets you acquire along the way. It's an entirely valid decision that no one will stop you from making. But so long as you live your life doing what you're told because it's all you've ever known, fulfilling other people's dreams of genocide, you will never be able to achieve your own. Not your own genocide, just dreams in general. So for both me and the Shade, who would never shut up about not seeing the sun, the choice was simple. Because sometimes, the best thing to do with your life isn't to wake up daddy from his nap in an hour or so like he said, but instead to take advantage of this newfound lapse in supervision to walk out of the house and go find a nice deep well to play in so that you can find a new, better, Daddy. My playthrough ended with the shade being gently lifted from that well, for him to finally see his first glimpse of the surface above, for him to finally breathe his first breath of fresh air, for him to only scare the piss out of this kid lifting the bucket, causing him to drop the shade back into the well and onto his head, ending his life immediately. When the game ends, you cannot play it again, because you aren't playing a game, you're playing with a life. And you typically only get one of those, so I hope you're happy with the decisions you've made along the way. However, also like real life, if you fuck things up, you can always look up on YouTube what a better, more fulfilling life you could have lived if things had only turned out just a little differently.
We can go viral with this one.
Turns out, you can actually see who's lowering the water bucket if you just stand in the corner here at the top of the collapsed mine before you go over to the well. It makes sense in retrospect. I just wish I knew I could actually see who was coming, considering I'm pretty sure they only show up once every 24 real-time hours, but I get the point of the game. It's fine. Live life for yourself and figure out what you want from it. Then go look up a guide on how to do that so you don't throw it all away like I did. Remember to like and subscribe because the algorithm says I need to ask you to do that. And a very special thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. Your generosity lifts my spirits like a blind man with a bucket, and I love you all. All right, bye-bye.